Thanks everybody for being here. How many people were at Gillette Stadium yesterday in person? How many people watched it? Okay. I am 100% from New England. I grew up in Massachusetts. I love this place. I have just been walking through, checking out all the different exhibits here, the work you do. It's extraordinary. I want to learn more about it. I'm going to try to go through my presentation as quickly as possible because I think the questions will be the most fun. I want to hear from you. I have a question I want to ask you at the end. So thanks for having me. I'm going to apologize. My colleague Marissa Miley called me this morning from a place where I spend a lot of time, the emergency room. She has 2 boys. I have 4. And if I could measure, like in string, the miles of stitches that I have gotten with 4 boys in different... I go into the emergency room out where we live, and they're like, the Sennotts are back. But she had a terrible accident with one of her sons, toddler, and he just classic door hinge. So I'm sorry she's not with us. It's a pretty darn good excuse for a mom or a dad, and it's really our loss. I want to just say Marissa Miley is our senior editor for health and the environment, 2 places you care about a lot that intersect. I want to really encourage you to check out our work at GroundTruth about the environment and know that Marissa is really the person largely behind that. I am a Middle East expert. I know Hamas and I know Hezbollah like there's no tomorrow. But to really take it to the level of the work you do, I'll just humbly stand before you and say, I don't think I'm going to impress you with my knowledge of the engineering and the science of the work you do. But I do want to share with you my passion, which is storytelling and being a journalist. I'm going to try to walk you through what I do, and then I hope share with you some ideas around how you can tell the story of the work you do. I think maybe one of the greatest shortcomings right now in the last 5 years, we've done a lot of reporting on climate change around the world, and I'd say one of the greatest struggles we share is we have to get better at telling the story of the environment. We have to find ways that are proportionate and accurate, that don't politicize the language. Sometimes for some people the words climate change puts people off immediately. And if we just think about it as the environment, or as I learned at breakfast this morning, if we think of it as one water, if we think of this as something we're all in together, like your video shared, I think that's the beginning of the really good storytelling that needs to be done, the good journalism that needs to be done around this issue. So I'm going to just go through these slides, and I wanted to start with the definition of what we do. How many of you here, try not to read, have heard of GroundTruth before? Have heard its scientific meaning? Okay. So I have a lot of experience with GroundTruth in its sort of basic form. I've been there on the ground trying to find truths as a journalist, really for my entire career. I began out in Western Massachusetts, in Western New England at a small public radio station called WFCR. It serves the Pioneer Valley. I went to UMass Amherst. It was my first job out of college was that job, and the first story I ever covered was my own graduation. And the first story was Dr. J got an honorary doctorate. That's a good story. People my age know who Dr. J was. If you're under 30, lean over to someone else and ask them who's Dr. J. I love journalism. I feel like I've had such a fortunate career telling stories around the world. And for me, it's always been the local has become the global. So when I was out in Western Massachusetts, the local stories were about plant closings. This was in the 80s. But that was tied to a global economy, and that was tied to a shift that was really hurting local people. And I tried to really have the local reporting about the death of an industrial plant connect to that global economy. I then went on and worked at the New York Daily News, and I covered cops. And I was covering crack cocaine when you had to stop and explain what it was every time. Now we all know what crack cocaine is. We know how much it ravaged New York City. But I connected the reporting to the global story, and I said crack cocaine comes from somewhere. It's a place called Medellin, Colombia, and I really encouraged the New York Daily News that wasn't used to having reporters with passports who speak Spanish. And I'm like, I got both, and let's go. And they said, go ahead. And I ended up reporting that story from Medellin, Colombia. So again, local to global. In 1993, I was covering cops. I was a World Trade Center big bang out of the World Trade Center parking garage. I was in Lower Manhattan. This is 1993. That big bang brought on sirens, and I was in a diner right nearby in Lower Manhattan. And again, I'm a police reporter. So when I hear sirens, and then I hear a lot of sirens, and then I hear even more sirens, I start walking towards what the problem is. And I saw smoke billowing out of the parking garage of the World Trade Center. And again, it's 1993. In 1993, a loud bang in Lower Manhattan, smoke pouring out of the World Trade Center, people streaming down the streets with their faces covered in soot, very scared, some injured. Nobody thought terrorism. Not a single person. Just 1993. Everybody thought it was a generator explosion. And that fascinates me because today, if you had a loud bang in Lower Manhattan, there was smoke pouring out of the World Trade Center, our immediate understanding would be, oh my God, they've struck again, right? But there was a different sense of risk assessment then. There was a different sense of what are we up against? What do we need to secure ourselves as a country against? It was very, very different. And I began reporting that story, and I stayed with it, and I broke a lot of those stories. Remember the guy who went in, if you remember, the bomb was packed by Middle East terrorists, as it turned out, but we had no idea who it was at first, inside of a Ryder rental truck. Do you remember this? Okay. So one of the first stories we broke was we found out about the Ryder rental truck. So I went to the Ryder rental place in New Jersey, and I was there when the FBI began to move in on a Palestinian named Mohammed Salameh, who was the, quote, mastermind, but was stupid enough to go back to Ryder to get his $40 deposit on the rental truck. And that story was like that then. It was a police story. This was not, I am an international correspondent covering Islamic extremism. I was a cop reporter covering a crime in New York City. And the reason I start there is because for me that led to a career as a Middle East correspondent. And throughout a career as a Middle East correspondent, I had the great fortune of coming to work for the Boston Globe. So in '93, I break all these stories. I'm covering the World Trade Center bombing. And Matt Storin, the editor of the Boston Globe, got in touch, and we decided that, wow, I'd have an opportunity to go and work for the Boston Globe. And I really wanted to do that. And he said, and we probably can make you Middle East correspondent because the work you're doing as a cop reporter, covering this story, finding out about these threads and who these people are, it's really important. And so, sure enough, I came to the Globe. I worked for a few years. I covered the Big Dig when they were doing the 9A contract, and they were sort of threading the needle here, and it was just such an engineering thing. I'm sure this was like, some of you might have even worked on some of these aspects of this project, but it was an exciting time in Boston, covered those local stories. But eventually, 1997, my wife and I have a baby, and about 3 weeks later, they announced, hey, we want you to be Middle East Bureau Chief. And that's great. Got a little baby. We go over, and it's the height of the bus bombings. This is when Jerusalem is really hot, and the Intifada starts to kick off a few years later, and it's a very intense time. But it was a local story that led me to cover the Middle East. And I did that for a long time, for many, many years. And then in 2001, September, the bus bombings got so intense, the Globe put us in London to be London Bureau Chief. And I said to my wife, this is going to be awesome. Blue blazer, Eurostar, Paris, no more war zones, no more Middle East. We moved in on the morning of 9/11 in London. Literally, the moving truck was there. And literally by noon, London time, the whole world had changed. And I knew I was going to be right back. And I had already covered this story for 8 years because local for me was global. The planes left our airport here at Logan. So again, local was global. And by September 19th, I was in Afghanistan and was among the first reporters on the ground in Afghanistan. So the reason I wanted to tell you that is a massive security threat we understand. When our country was attacked, I had no problem telling the story of how our country fought against it in Afghanistan and then in Iraq, and it continues to today. And that's my expertise. The two deep themes. One is local is global, and it has been for the kind of journalism I do, and I think the best of journalism. And the second one is it's easy to tell the story of a security threat when it goes bang. And people are physically afraid. Much harder to tell the story of a security threat when it has to do with lead in the water. Much harder to tell a story of a security threat when it has to do with climate change. All of these stories, for me, emanate as this theme, ground truth. So I was embedded with the military in my work, and I kept hearing this phrase, ground truth, and it really grabbed me. It really fascinated me, because I, of course, understood it on an intuitive level. It's about who's the guy who went out and got the truth in that piece of ground and came back and shared it. So someone would go out to their area of operation, and they'd come back for the briefing, and the commanding officer would say, what's the ground truth in that area? And the soldiers who'd been on the ground there would share, this is what it looks like, we think the security threat's pretty high, we think the roads are really bad, there's snipers up here, there's there, and it just was this phrase I got used to. And then one day, I was with a technician who painted targets. You know how that works? So you use a laser, you paint targets, military locks on the target and strikes. And he said to me, ground truth is a technical word. I don't know if you know that. And he opened my eyes to this, that NASA coined the phrase for ground truth as a word that has to do with the process for calibrating satellites. So when a satellite is in the sky and it's measuring anything on the Earth, whether that's temperature, barometric pressure, visual images, anything that satellites can measure has to be calibrated. In other words, the satellite gets a reading, but then you need a human being on the ground to get a reading and compare those two, and if necessary, recalibrate the satellite to be accurate to the human reading, or what they call the ground truth. And that process is called ground truthing. It's taking technology, comparing it to what you're really seeing on the ground, and going with that. Go with what you see on the ground as the baseline of truth. I never thought of NASA as poetic, but I really, really love this line. In the NASA technical definition of ground truth, they say, when the technology and the ground truthing are in conflict, trust the human reading. Okay? I love that. And that's why we named our organization the Ground Truth Project, because we are about human readings. We are about old school journalism and putting journalists on the ground to find the story. It's the only way you really get at it. It's been lost in this age of technology where we're bombarded by information from the left and from the right, from BuzzFeed and HuffPost, and it's hard to know where it's coming from. It's really hard to understand what it all means. We now know we can get played in these stories, right? No matter where you come from on the Mueller report, there's one thing that's for sure. There were a lot of forces out there trying to play us and to get us to understand things differently than the reality through technology. We've got to be sophisticated about that. That is how I see our work, and it's why I think it's the perfect metaphor, that in a time of technology when we're swarmed with information, we have to have that calibration process of ground truth. And you, all of you, the work you do is a form of ground truth. All the work you do around New England, looking at water quality, looking at the systems for clean water, looking at the systems we'll have and that need repair, you're the ground truth. The question is, are we as journalists getting your ground truth to calibrate it and be able to tell the story. And I'd say we're not. So the challenge I want to make to you is I want to hear from you. What are the stories we're missing? What do we need to be focusing on as journalists? How can we do it? All right, so that is what GroundTruth is. I've covered the military a lot. They do a lot of call and response. So I might just say, at some point tonight, when I say ground, you say truth, okay? I'm not saying I'm going to do it right now, but I might do it at some point. Our mission at GroundTruth is to support a new generation of journalists to tell the most important stories of their generation. We think there's a generation of journalists with huge promise and not enough opportunity. So we connect them to that. We're a nonprofit, and we basically are trying to get journalists out there on the ground telling these stories by supporting them with foundation support. Our foundations that support us are foundations like the Knight Foundation, the Ford Foundation. We work with the Luce Foundation. We work with many different foundations that have been really generous to us and supportive, and we've been lucky to build the base for that. The need is extraordinary. The talent of young journalists is incredible, but they have very few places to go. They could go to Facebook, or they could go to some place like Huffington Post, but they end up in a cubicle, not really doing the real job. They're not really out there on the ground getting at that ground truth. So we're trying to give them an opportunity to get closer to that. This is the kind of work we do. We have a GroundTruth Films division. We have a podcast. We do digital multimedia. This project featured here, The Last Generation, is about the king tides in the Pacific that are specifically hitting the Marshall Islands. And the tides there are such that within 25 years, the population is going to have to be out. So there's an organized retreat right now. And we told this story through the eyes of children to talk about their island, their traditions, and how they're not going to be able to have their kids there. They are the last generation of that island. And it's a powerful tool, and we learned. Tell the story of climate change through the eyes of children, particularly children who aren't overly, coaxed one way or another. They just look at it clean, like they watch the water coming in and wiping out the graveyard where their grandfather is buried. They know that their uncle's house has already fallen into the sea, and now they've retreated down off 100 yards or so back. They know that their parents have told them they're going to get through a few more years of school and they have to arrange to go to the United States. And this generation is so articulate. It's unbelievable how these young people explain what they see every day on their island. And we really, I think we struck upon something there, which is that's the voice that we need to hear more from. We also do a lot with photography, and the work that we do is really, I think it's meaningful. I think it's often impactful. I know that the young people who are doing it are extraordinary, and I really want to invite you to join our newsletter and follow the work. This is the series we've done on climate change, Living Proof, the human toll of climate change. We wanted to look at human consequences of climate change, and we began this series right here in Boston. So we started off looking right in Boston Harbor at what's going to happen with rising tides. Are we ready for it or are we not? We wanted to look at what has Boston learned or not learned, perhaps, from others who look at the issues around water rising and rising tides really carefully. Jakarta and the Netherlands are two. It's interesting that the Netherlands was a Dutch colony because they're really good at working with water, and you probably all would know more about this than I do, but I was fascinated by the engineering approaches, how to live with water, and Boston delegation ended up going to the Netherlands to study their approaches, and we followed them on that tour. We also tell stories that are more complicated. Now, you know I'm a war correspondent. I actually hate that phrase, but sadly that is what I have covered in Afghanistan and Iraq. And there was a war that perplexed all of us, and that's Somalia. Do you remember Black Hawk Down? Okay, and do you remember when Black Hawk Down happened? And we all said, like, what? We're there, like, giving out food. Why are they killing U.S. Marines when we're trying to give them aid? Do you remember this? Or have any of you seen the movie? Or read the book by Mark Bowden, which is an extraordinary book? We wanted to look at Somalia in a different way and try to explain that the war in Somalia is not necessarily as confusing as it seems. It's pretty simple. It's about a drought. The drought took over Somalia, and amid crushing limited resources, people were forced to migrate from where they lived. Those who were forced to migrate were more religious and rural, and they got forced into urban communities where their religion became more and more pronounced. The religion became almost a militarism for them to empower their tribes around their need for resources and to push back against an urban elite that was more secular. That's a pretty simplistic definition, but it's not bad. And our correspondent spent a full year in Somalia looking at a very fascinating way of telling the story of climate change by saying, this is how climate change caused a war. And if we really want to take that through line, you have to look at it 25 years. And these two reporters, Nikki Sebeki and Laura Heaton, they found the most extraordinary way to do it, which is they found out about a gentleman who was a geologist who had been really researching through aerial photography the impact of drought. And he'd done it for like 25 years. And his aerial photography tells the story of the drought and the forced migrations, and then he was kidnapped by al-Shabaab, the Islamic militants. And he had spirited away all of his aerial photography in London, where he was from. And these two reporters got a hold of that and basically allowed his story to live on. He is still missing. And it is a kind of a murder, or I hope it's not a murder, it's a cold case. It's a mystery wrapped inside a climate change story about a heroic figure who tried to document it, and in doing so, really risked his life because he had to get out into areas where it was very dangerous for a Westerner to be, and he was kidnapped by al-Shabaab. Really encourage you to read it. It's the kind of powerful storytelling I think we're going to need to do if we're going to tell the story of climate change. But we also work, this is some of his aerial photography. This is the work of the photographers who worked on it. It's, we did it in partnership with ABC News Nightline, and we also did it with Foreign Policy Magazine, and it's really a quite in-depth, multimedia, immersive experience with photography and video, as well as the written word, research, graphics, aerial photography. It's an extraordinary body of work. We're very proud of it. So the GroundTruth project started off doing a lot of international reporting, and we had a mission statement that was driven that way. And we said we covered divided societies and struggling democracies. So we were really big in Egypt during the Arab Spring. We cover Iraq, we cover Afghanistan. As I shared with you, we covered Somalia. We've also covered Myanmar, where we really watched yearning for democracy, then thwarted. And we've always been on this issue of struggling democracies, divided societies. In the summer of 2016, it just hit any of us who were paying attention. Our own country is pretty divided, and our own country is in some ways a struggling democracy right now. We're not certainly functioning very well as a democracy in Washington. And I really felt like we have to do better, that journalism has failed tremendously. We haven't done a good job listening to people. And I felt like, how did I get so far away from my roots as a local reporter on these global issues that now I'm not even listening to my own country carefully enough, and they're mad as hell, right? And we're not hearing them. So I thought we need to change that. And we started to think about how we could do that. And we found a pretty extraordinary partner in a guy named Steve Waldman, who had a really interesting idea where he said, there's a public service movement out there in education, Teach for America. There's City Year, which is an extraordinary organization founded here by Alan Casey as a co-founder, and Alan is one of our board members. And he's really into public service, big part of AmeriCorps and a part of a whole public service movement. And suddenly we began to vector in on this idea that Steve Waldman brought to us, which was, what if you had Teach for America for journalism? What if you offered a new generation the opportunity to go out and really take a call to service and go serve local communities by doing local reporting, covering planning boards, covering water commissioners, covering stories like small little town halls. And there is so much of a collapse of journalism in America right now that I don't think you may be not aware of it here in New England, but the rest of the country and most of the country, Newspapers are shutting down right and left. Last week alone, 1,000 reporters lost their jobs. This is a crisis point for journalism. American journalism is in crisis, and I think that crisis has become a crisis for our democracy. A really functioning free press that really takes it seriously not to be partisan, to not have opinions, to just go get the facts on the ground. That is getting lost, and we can't let it get lost. And I love it way too much to let it get lost without really fighting hard. I am part of that Boston Irish tribe. I am going to fight like hell for what I believe in. And I really believe that reporting is needed for our democracy to function. And I think local reporting might be the most important thing, because who cares whether you're a Republican or a Democrat if your water system isn't functioning? All you care about is get it fixed. My kids got to bathe, I got to cook dinner, I want to be able to drink water. I think local reporting on issues like water, local reporting on issues like whether or not to build the new school, those are the stories that aren't getting covered right now. And I think it has a lot to do with how we pull apart as a country and how we start to think of the media as these coastal elites. Because if you don't go see your reporter from your community in the grocery store, then you don't really know what a journalist does or who they are, or whether you can go say, hey, I thought that story was really unfair, or I thought that story was really great. You've got to get that local connection back. I used to love covering the big dig here because I had a couple friends who were working in different aspects of the contract. And we would talk about it, and people would see me like literally on some talk show or something, and they'd come up and yell at me in a bar about how I got it wrong. Like, that is what it's all about. So we started Report for America last year, January of 2018, with 13 reporters in newsrooms across the country. We focused in Appalachia, we focused in Mississippi Delta, we focused in the border, New Mexico, Texas. We have people in Pennsylvania in the State House. We really wanted to spread out. And this year, earlier this month, we announced we're going from 13 reporters to 60 reporters. And one of the issues we really want to take on is water. We think there's a lot of important local reporting to do on the issue of water, here in New England and across the country. So Report for America has this idea, which is public service for local communities. We are really ambitious here. We have 13 last year, 60 this year. We've got funding for 250 next year. We're trying to get to 1,000 reporters in the field. Then we start to really transform the landscape of journalism and bring it back. And my colleague Steve Waldman has a great quote where he said, trust is a crop that grows locally. That is so true. We've got to get good at local reporting, and I think we could use your help for how do we cover local water issues. I want to share with you one project we did in Appalachia. Young reporter named Will Wright, really extraordinary young man, grew up in rural Pennsylvania, went to University of Kentucky, lands in the cohort of our very first Report for America Corps members, and we call them Corps like Peace Corps, Marine Corps, Report for America Reporting Corps. This is an extraordinary project that Will literally stumbled onto in Martin County, Kentucky, going to a commissioner's meeting, and there was a huge number of people at the meeting, and he didn't really understand why. And then people started to talk about the water quality there. And then he got it. They were furious that their water was not clean. And he began to really listen to them. They told their story. He broke the story. It's really extraordinary what they did. Within a very short time, they put this story on the map, and within a very short time, they had made it so that the water commissioner was forced out. $5 million in emergency funding was immediately deployed, and people started high-fiving him on the street. Like, that's local trust in reporting, right? Took an issue, brought it to the fore, and people really admired it and thanked him for it. I'm going to share with you a film that they put together about their reporting.
I'm Molly Bourne. I work with West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and I'm a Report for America Corps member. This is Williamson, West Virginia. It's along the Tug Fork River on the border of Kentucky and southern West Virginia. We are living and working here in the southern coal fields of West Virginia and in eastern Kentucky to try to document what it's like to live with an aging sewer and water infrastructure system.
My name is Will Wright. I work for the Lexington Herald-Leader, and I'm a Corps member with Report for America. I think this reporting is public service. I think all journalism is public service, but this project especially dives into things that affect people's daily life. Access to water is something that many people don't even think about, but in this region, maybe they don't trust the water, they often don't have access to it, their sewage isn't working. So these are things that really affect people's daily lives, and I think it is a public service to bring those issues to light.
My name is Katie Coyne. I'm a reporter at the Charleston Gazette-Mail, which is a part of Report for America. Water and sewage infrastructure has been a prevalent problem in West Virginia and Kentucky, and not only those states, but the entire region of Appalachia for decades now, years. And it's getting to the point now that I think a lot of things are catching up with each other and it's at a tipping point.
I still feel like the main thing I need is to get lots of interviews with individual ratepayers. That's still the main thing that I need to do. I've done some of that, but not enough, and I'll do that today. Then there's the other person we're meeting today is that Barbie Ann Maynard, who is she's been delivering water. She's also running for magistrate, and just like a activist lady. Also does not trust the water. Water district says that the water is fine, safe to drink, and here's somebody who doesn't believe that. This is Katie Coyne from the Charleston Gazette-Mail.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for showing us around and everything.
I love doing this.
Yeah?
I'm Molly. Nice to meet you.
In October 11th of 2000, a coal slurry pond broke and 307 million gallons of arsenic toxic sludge entered upstream right here from our water source for our drinking supply. So we started getting these warnings on the back of our water bill that said if you are pregnant, infant, elderly, have a compromised immune system, consult a physician. Before drinking this water, it says causes liver damage, kidney damage, central nervous system damage, and twice it says causes cancer.
Do you know anybody who drinks the water?
No.
Nobody?
Nobody.
Yeah.
Upstream was where arsenic entered our water supply. Then the next step was where the sewer was entering upstream. Now here, they're sucking it off the bottom, which is now full of arsenic and fecal matter. Our system is so dilapidated and outdated that it can't possibly treat what supply we have. If you turn on your tap and it's white and it smells like chlorine, that's not good. If it's brown, if it's blue, I've seen it all. Water should be clear and odorless. And that's something we don't have here and haven't for a very long time. It's a basic human right to have clean water. And we're in the United States of America. We're in eastern Kentucky, Appalachia. We have beauty, we have nature, we have water. It's just the good water is not getting to the people.
Our water system was originally designed to service Inez, and now it services the entire county. So it wasn't built to service as many people as it does, and so I think, from a capacity standpoint, there's definitely some things that we need to address. We run such high pressures in lines that weren't rated for that. Are the concerns of the people about the quality of the water legitimate? I think somewhat. I have never experienced the issues that a lot of people in our county say they experience.
What are some of those issues?
Just, I guess, bad water quality. It comes out like mud. I mean that's happened, of course, because you'll have a line break and there's dirt gets in. You just have to flush your lines out. I drink the water every day. Every day. Make my coffee with it. I shower in it. We cook with it. If I need a drink of water, I get it out of the sink.
We all stumbled upon this just reporting our regular stories, and I think that one makes it obvious that it's a big problem, but also when people tell you that this is happening and they know it's happening, you owe them your ear to listen to them about it. So you were saying, be careful breathing this in?
Oh yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. This isn't a pothole, you know, this is raw sewage. I've been told the lines are from the 30s.
Yep.
And the cost to fix it will be millions upon millions, so it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's basically what I've been told.
We were down here on Thursday after that storm hit, and we could, it was
bad.
You could taste it, essentially.
Yeah,
it was bad.
Down
Yep.
your throat.
Yeah.
Have you experienced anyone
Yes.
getting sick or anything?
I've got my stomach's got upset, but it's mostly the back of your throat.
Yeah.
You'll dry heave.
Yeah, and it's kind of the smell mixed with just the gases,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, and you'll sit there and you will dry heave when it gets bad. I'm just surprised there is no federal or state grants or loans that would be available, you know, to try to, you know, help. It's like I said, raw sewage versus a pothole. You would think they'd be jumping on it.
Already mic'd up with all your stuff. We are on the side of the 4-lane. It's the main highway that stretches across southern West Virginia to central West Virginia and then down to eastern Kentucky. This is a free spring, a natural well that is on the side of the road that people stop at regularly with literal barrels filled with water. For a lot of people with wells, when we have power outages, they can't use their water sources. So things like this, free natural springs, if you don't have access to bottled water or you don't have money for it because it tends to be expensive and it adds up if you have kids and you're bathing and everything, these places can literally be lifesavers. In McDowell County, they have issues with their water year-round. They've been on boil water advisories for upwards of 5 years, and they can't drink their water. If you need water, and I think if you're in dire straits, you can kind of stop by and do what you need and keep on with your life. Hi.
How do you do?
Good. How do you do?
I'm fine, thanks.
How long would you say you've been coming here, sir?
I'd say a couple of years now.
How many will you fill up today?
Just these two.
Do you still drink your tap water, or is this solely what you drink? Not really? Why not?
This doesn't have chlorine and other things in it, and this is better than bottled water.
Thanks for talking to us.
Okay.
Have a good rest of your day. Someone at the Logan County PSD or at the health department there said, I can't tell you legally to drink it, but I've been drinking it since I was 6 years old and I'm fine. And it tastes clean, it tastes clear. For me personally, it tastes better than my tap water. It's impossible to ignore when you talk to people and they tell you about their lives, and it's just kind of a commonality that they accept of you can't wash your clothes or do dishes or drink your water. If you do, you might just get sewage coming out of your commode one day. It's not a great way to live in 2018, and we talk about trying to make everyone here feel included, and we want Appalachia and West Virginia to keep up with the rest of the world, but we're leaving them behind.
I think it's also important to the community to let them know that you're here and that there is a reporter and that people in Lexington or from more major news outlets care about their issues.
We're hoping to illuminate what it's like to live on a daily basis with a system that's broken for many people, a system that is a basic human right.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm realizing I'm standing between you and lunch, and I do not want to do that. I am here to answer any questions if we have time. If we don't, I'll stay here and we can just do it informally. But that is the kind of reporting we want to see more of. We want to get your ideas. We have reporters now. Report for America will start to come to New England. We're going to be in Maine. We're going to be in Connecticut, and we're going to be in Cape Cod, WCAI, Cape and Islands Public Radio. We're at the Connecticut Mirror, which is a new digital news organization in Connecticut, and we're at the Maine Public Interest Reporting Committee. And those are a couple of New England fonts of information that we hope will have really eager reporters like this team. And I'd love them to reach out to you. I'd love you to reach out to us. And the question I wanted to put to you, and I'm understanding you got to move on, and that's fine, but if any of you have time, I'd love to hear, what are we missing? What are the issues right here in New England that we need to pay attention to around water as a human right? It's absolutely the United Nations that defines that. And if we have any communities here that are not getting access to that or struggling with access to that, we should be reporting on it much better than we are. So I'll count on you to let me know if you have time. But just in case you do need to go, I'll do one shout out. I'm going to say ground. You're going to say, okay, you ready? Ground. Thank you.